surviving in a post-apocalyptic world, fighting mutated creatures and the clock. As darkness fell on the ruined world, a sense of dread and hopelessness began to creep in. The survivors knew that they were running out of options. But just as all seemed lost, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. A radio transmission, crackling with static, offered a glimmer of hope, a rumored safe haven, a place where humanity could rebuild and survive. But with time running out, the survivors must embark on a perilous journey across a landscape overrun by monsters and marauders, facing unimaginable dangers and impossible odds. Will they reach the sanctuary in time, or will they become yet another victim of the apocalypse? Only time will tell in this epic tale of survival and sacrifice in a world gone mad. The world had changed drastically in the past few decades. Climate change had led to widespread natural disasters, with extreme weather conditions becoming the norm. Hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods ravaged coastlines and inland communities alike. Rising sea levels had swallowed entire cities, leaving nothing but empty streets and submerged buildings in their wake. As the world struggled to adapt to these new conditions, food shortages became a pressing issue. Crops failed in the face of relentless heat and drought, and many people were left to starve. Some turned to desperate measures, looting and rioting in search of food. In the midst of this chaos, a small group of survivors huddled together in an abandoned building, trying to stay alive. They had managed to find a small stash of food and water, but it was clear that it wouldn't last long. One night, as they sat around a flickering candle, they heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like something was scratching at the door. They all froze, not daring to move. The scratching grew louder and more frantic, and then suddenly, the door burst open. A group of emaciated, wild-eyed people poured into the room, brandishing makeshift weapons. They were clearly driven mad by hunger and desperation. The survivors fought back as best they could, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. In the end, only a few of them managed to escape, running out into the night, not knowing if they would ever find safety again. The world had become a living nightmare, with no end in sight. Climate change had brought about the end of humanity, and now only the strongest and most ruthless would survive. As the survivors ran through the dark and deserted streets, they realized that their situation was even more dire than they had imagined. They were surrounded by chaos and destruction, and there seemed to be no place left that was safe. They stumbled upon a small community that had managed to survive the disaster. They were welcomed with open arms and given food and shelter. But as they settled in, they soon realized that this was no paradise. The people were living in fear, constantly on guard against raiders and looters. They had formed a militia to protect their community and were constantly on the lookout for new threats. One night, as the survivors were huddled around a campfire, they heard a strange noise in the distance. It sounded like something was moving through the bushes. The militia members quickly sprang into action, weapons at the ready. But as they approached, they saw something that they never could have imagined. A creature, unlike anything they had ever seen before, emerged from the darkness. It was huge, with matted fur and glowing eyes. It let out a deafening roar and charged at the group. The survivors fought back as best they could, but the creature was too strong. It quickly overpowered them and killed many of the militia members. The survivors realized that this was not just a random creature, but a product of the environmental destruction caused by climate change. The creature was a result of the mutations caused by the radiation and pollution. And it was not alone. More and more of these creatures began to appear, roaming the land and hunting down any survivors. The world had become a true horror story, where the only way to survive was to become ruthless and strong. The survivors knew that they had to adapt and fight back or they would be doomed to the same fate as the rest of humanity. The survivors knew that they had to take action if they wanted to survive. They joined the militia and trained to fight against the creatures. They scoured the ruins of the cities for weapons and supplies. They were determined to protect their new community and find a way to survive in this new, terrifying world. But as they battled the creatures, they realized that they were also fighting against another enemy, time. The food and resources were running low and they knew that they couldn't stay in one place for too long. They started to search for other communities or any sign of civilization that may have survived the disaster. One day, they received a radio transmission. It was faint and distorted, but it was enough to give them hope. They followed the signal and finally found a group of people who had managed to establish a safe haven. They were living in a fortified city, protected by high walls and armed guards. They were also working on a plan to combat the climate change, using advanced technology to mitigate the effects of extreme weather conditions. The survivors were overjoyed and relieved to have found a place where they could finally feel safe. They joined the community and worked together to rebuild a new world. They knew that it wouldn't be easy, but they were determined to survive, no matter what. And as they looked towards the future, they realized that there was still hope for humanity, even in the darkest of times. As the survivors searched for a way to survive in this new world, they began to realize the true extent of the damage caused by climate change. The creatures they were fighting were not the only threat they faced. The extreme weather conditions made it difficult to grow crops and find clean water. The food shortages were becoming more and more severe, and many people were dying of starvation. The survivors knew that they had to find a long-term solution. They started to research and experiment with new ways to adapt to the changing environment. They built greenhouses to grow crops and developed new farming techniques to cope with the unpredictable weather. They also began to work on developing new technologies that could help mitigate the effects of climate change. But their efforts were met with resistance from some members of the community who were not willing to change their ways. They wanted to stick to the old ways of doing things and refused to see the reality of the situation. The survivors knew that they had to act fast, before it was too late. They decided to leave the community and venture out into the world to find others who were willing to work towards a solution. They knew that it would be a dangerous journey, but they were determined to make a difference. They set out into the unknown, with nothing but hope and determination to guide them. As they traveled, they encountered other survivors who were also struggling to adapt to the new world. They shared their knowledge and ideas and worked together to find a way to survive. They knew that it wouldn't be easy, but they were determined to make a difference. Together, they would find a way to save humanity from the horrors of climate change. As the survivors journeyed through the new world, they faced many challenges and obstacles. But they were determined to find a way to survive. They came across other survivors who were also struggling to adapt to the new world, and together, they worked towards finding a solution. Despite the hardships they faced, they never gave up hope. They continued to search for new ways to adapt to the changing environment and to mitigate the effects of climate change. They knew that it would be a long and difficult journey, but they were determined to make a difference. As they traveled, they came across a group of people who had managed to establish a sustainable community. They were living in harmony with the environment and had developed advanced technologies to cope with the extreme weather conditions. The survivors were overjoyed and relieved to have found a place where they could finally feel safe. They joined the community and worked together to rebuild a new world. The survivors knew that the fight was not over, but they were determined to make a difference. They knew that the future of humanity was uncertain, but they were determined to make a better world for future generations. They set out into the unknown, with nothing but hope and determination to guide them, to make a change for the better and to find a way for humanity to survive in this new world.